record. In the Simpson matter, Mr. Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Blazer, Mr. Scheck. People represented by Ms. Clark, Mr. Darden, and Mr. Kelberg. Jury is not present. Record should reflect that we had a brief in-chambers conference this morning to purpose of which was for counsel to alert the court of certain issues that will be coming up shortly. Mr. Cochran, anything else? Mr. Clark, anything else we need to discuss before we invite the jurors to join us?
I would like to. Bye-bye. Good morning, Your Honor.
Mr. Cochran, again.
Your Honor, in this matter, there are really two things, and the one perhaps can wait. But the first thing I'd like to call to Your Honor's attention and to get a clarification. I think that Your Honor's order of yesterday was greatly misunderstood by the so-called legal pundits and others, and there was perhaps premature celebration by some, and not, I think, understanding what the import of Your Honor's ruling. We expected in reading Your Honor with regard to the discovery issues, understand that. But the court will recall that in the course of Mr. Ullman's argument, Professor Ullman's argument, he'd indicated that we felt that we had a right to call Mr. Bosco because certainly there had been a waiver of the Shield law with regard to the article that was published in Penthouse last year. And we had never, ever intended to ask Mr. Bosco who his sources were. So I wanted to indicate to the court and make sure that my understanding was correct that we still plan to call him after the testimony of Dr. Baden. We also plan, as you know, to call Marcia Kessler because she will be on a number of issues. And we still also believe that Tracy Savage can be called from a standpoint of we cannot pierce the Shield law perhaps at this point. But we think there's certainly relevant testimony with regard to the fact that she made this report, made two reports, if the court recalls, and the reports were in error, and the reports fit right into what we believe is a reasonable inference that can be drawn. So the point I just wanted to make that your order did not preclude us from calling those individuals, and we still plan to do it next week. Now, I understand that people may have some further objection, and that's fine, but I'm just putting everybody on notice we plan to do that next week, Your Honor.
I'm surprised you take your legal analysis from the pundits.
Well, no, I don't, Your Honor. Other people told me about this. I try not to do that. And that's why I was amused by it when I was told last night everybody was making these statements. They didn't understand what had taken place at all.
I don't depend on the pundits to tell me what it was I meant when I ruled.
Right, and I think now, well, I think, Your Honor, we have a better understanding of what you meant, and we had talked about this in chambers, and I did, in fact, want to put this on the record.
All right. Thank you, Counsel.
The other thing, Your Honor, with regard to the North Carolina matter, I can address it now or address it perhaps later in the morning. Whatever Your Honor's pleasure is. I can make a brief statement now, if the court would care.
Well, let's save that. Let's use our jury time.
Sure.
Since we've already burned up a half hour of it.
Sure. It's fine, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Cochran. I'm not going to spend any time correcting the legal pundits. We understand what the court's ruling was, and I think that's all that's required. I had indicated to the court earlier that we had filed motions concerning the admissibility of that testimony as an issue apart from the discovery matter.
That was part of your points and authorities regarding Michelle Kessler.
That's right, Your Honor. I just wanted to point out to the court, because we've filed so many, that the briefs I'm referring to are trial briefs 8 and 12 that address the issue.
All right. Mrs. Ryerson, would you have the law clerks pull 8 and 12? All right. We'll just get ready for that argument again somewhere. Probably early next week, I suspect. All right. All right, anything else before I invite the jury to join us? All right, Deputy McNair, let's have the jury, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Record should reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I had a, excuse me, Deputy, I think we need to leave that. That's the beverage of choice of the witness. Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies to you for the delays yesterday. A number of issues came up that I had to resolve out of your presence, and it just wound up taking more time, and the witness was not, the next witness was not then available in the afternoon as I had anticipated. So my apologies to you. I hope they took you out and did some extra shopping or something yesterday, and we'll proceed with a full court date today. All right, the defense, Mr. Shapiro, are you going to present the next witness?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good morning. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we call Dr. Michael Baden.
All right, Dr. Baden.
Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the false announcement before this court should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat and
Thank you.
stand and state your first and last names for the record.
Michael Baden, B-A-D-E-N.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Dr. Baden.
Good morning, Mr. Shapiro.
How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Dr. Baden, what is your profession?
I'm a physician, medical examiner, forensic pathologist.
And what is your educational background that qualified you to attain that position?
Well, I received a Bachelor of Sciences degree from the City College of New York in 1955 and a medical degree, MD degree, from New York University School of Medicine in 1959.
Let me ask you now, at City College, did you receive any awards?
Yes.
What did you receive?
I was senior class president, Phi Beta Kappa, editor-in-chief of the newspaper, and I was essentially the valedictorian. I spoke at the commencement for the students.
And where was that college located?
It's located in upper Manhattan, New York City, Harlem area of New York City.
And from there you went to medical school?
From there I went to New York University Medical School, which is also in Manhattan.
And how long did you attend there?
From 1955 to 1959.
And upon graduation?
Upon graduation, where I received a medical degree, I then did an internship residency, chief residency at Bellevue Hospital Medical Center in New York City, which is associated with, at that time, New York University School of Medicine, also Columbia Presbyterian School of Medicine.
And who were your supervisors at that internship?
Well, in my first 2 years at Bellevue Hospital, I was an intern and resident in internal medicine under the training of Dr. Dickinson Richards, Dr. Andre Cournand, who had just won the Nobel prizes in medicine for their work on heart and lung disease, and I specialized in that.
So this is internal medicine, heart and lung, but something that you are not specializing in now, but which you have a background in.
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Then
And
after-
tell the jury about the rest of your medical training at this level.
After those 2 years, the 2 years in internal medicine, I then switched over to pathology. In internal medicine, I treated live people, and in pathology, I tried to find out what was wrong with people by various tests, autopsies, blood tests. In pathology, I stayed in pathology for the next 4 years, being chief resident in pathology, fellow at Bellevue Hospital, and finished my training in pathology in 1965.
After your formal education, did you get any appointments as a medical examiner?
Yes, while a resident physician at Bellevue Hospital, beginning around 1960, when I was licensed to practice medicine in New York State, I worked for the medical examiner's office on a part-time basis as an assistant medical examiner for the city of New York, which is much like the coroner medical examiner system in Los Angeles. And on completion, I stayed there the 5 years, and on completion of my training in pathology at Bellevue, my official training, I then became a full-time medical examiner for the city of New York.
And the appointments that you had in New York, were they made by any specific person or persons?
Well, my initial...
How does that system work in New York?
In New York City, it worked as part of this, at that time, as part of the civil service system, that it was the initial entry positions of part-time position when I was at Bellevue Hospital, and then my first appointment was at the discretion of the chief medical examiner, Dr. Milton Halpern at that time. And then all the subsequent positions are by examinations and merit in the civil service system of the city of New York.
All right, will you tell the jury about the subsequent appointments, how they came about, and what positions you've held?
Yes, I remained as a full-time medical examiner, junior medical examiner, associate medical examiner, and then I was appointed about the end of 1960s, around 69, 68, as deputy chief medical examiner, city of New York. I remained in that position for about 9 years, and then was appointed from a civil service list as chief medical examiner for the city of New York. And I remained in that position for a year and reverted back to deputy chief medical examiner in the city of New York.
When you say you reverted back, what were the circumstances surrounding that?
Objection, Your Honor. It's calling for hearsay, calling for speculation.
The circumstances were that the mayor at the time, Mayor Koch, wanted somebody else to be chief medical examiner, and accumulated certain statements from the 5 district attorneys in New York City. Unlike most cities, New York City is 1 city and 5 counties, which is just a reverse usually. And there's Brooklyn and Manhattan and Bronx, Staten Island. We call them boroughs, but they're counties. They're actual counties, as opposed to Los Angeles County, which has a lot of cities. New York City is 1 city that has a lot of counties. And each county, each borough, has a district attorney, but there's 1 chief medical examiner that covers all 5 boroughs. So at the time, after I'd been chief medical examiner for a year, the Mayor Koch asked for opinions from the 5 district attorneys, 4 of whom were very pleased with my work, and 1 of whom, the district attorney in Manhattan, felt I wasn't a team player and felt I shouldn't be chief medical examiner.
And this is something that you have spoken about freely and, in fact, have written about in published
yes.
material.
Yes.
Now, you say about being a team player. What, in your opinion, is the role of a medical examiner, an independent medical examiner?
My opinion is that a medical examiner has to be an independent finder of scientific facts and truths, regardless of where those findings lead. We speak as much for the defendant as for the prosecutor. We speak as much for the doctor as for the patient, that we speak for the dead person, and we're supposed to find in any death as much information that can properly determine how a person died and anticipate answering any questions that might arise later, whether criminally or civilly, or by the family. The family has a right to know how a loved one died. So the medical examiner, although working in a political system, which is a problem, has to remain an independent scientist, an independent physician, and be impartial to any sides that might be concerned in how a person died.
And is that how you view your role?
Yes.
Has that ever changed?
No.
In the course of your career in New York as a medical examiner, did you come in contact with Dr. Lakshmanan?
Yes.
Would you tell the jury about that, please?
in the mid-'70s, I guess, 1977, 78, around that time, Dr. Lakshmanan did what I had done 10 years earlier, and he was he moonlighted. He was a pathology resident in one of the hospitals in New York City, and he would do extra work in the medical examiner's office and under my supervision, as I had done when I was a resident at Bellevue Hospital. So he was a moonlighting pathologist learning about forensic pathology in New York City.
Have you done any work in the field of teaching
Yes.
related to your expertise as a forensic pathologist and medical examiner?
Yes.
Would you kindly tell the jury what that has entailed?
Yes, I teach aspects of medical examiner work, forensic medicine, forensic pathology at a number of institutions. I'm presently visiting professor of pathology at Albert Einstein School of Medicine in New York City, adjunct professor of pathology and laboratory medicine at Albany Medical Center in Albany, New York. I've just completed visiting professorship at John Jay School of Medicine, John Jay School of Criminal Justice, which teaches law enforcement persons and gives a degree in law enforcement. And I am on the faculty, or have been on the faculty at New York University School of Medicine, Columbia Physicians and Surgeons School of Medicine. In all these capacities, I do teaching part-time teaching in forensic medicine. Some are courses, some are just lectures.
And who are you teaching? Who are the students that you address?
The students are either medical students, law students. I've been a professor at New York Law School. Medical students, law students, house staff, residents, and law enforcement personnel.
There's been a lot of expert witnesses who have testified about professional associations. Would you share with the jury any professional associations that you belong to, and any positions you've held within those associations?
Yes, I'm past president of the Society of Medical Jurisprudence, past vice president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, a fellow in the College of American Pathologists, and other organizations that pertain to what pathologists and forensic pathologists do.
You attend meetings
Yes.
of associations?
I attend meetings, associations. I run conferences on forensic medicine, which I'm supposed to do next week.
When is that?
Which I'm supposed to do next week,
When?
Monday.
When? Monday.
Sunday.
Well, hopefully we'll be finished with you before that time.
Thank you.
Regarding publications, has any of the things you have studied and taught in your field been published?
Yes, I've published some 80 articles or been co-author relative to medical examiner work, mostly drug abuse, alcoholism, which I was interested in, especially when I was in New York City. I've written a number of chapters in textbooks, and I've been author of a book on alcohol, drugs, and violent death. I edited a textbook on forensic medicine, legal medicine, that was published in Japan.
What's the name of that book? Do you recall?
Atlas of Legal Medicine, which was the first English book in forensic medicine in Japan in the 1960s that I'm aware of. And I recently did write a book meant for explaining to the public what medical examiners do, called Unnatural Death, Confessions of a Medical Examiner.
And that tells basically your life story and...
Well, it goes into some of the investigations I've been involved with that I thought could be informative as to how medical examiners should function and on how bad the system is in general in the United States.
So it was a critique.
Doctor, if you would, if you allow Mr. Shapiro to continue asking the question, please let me answer because of both those ends.
I apologize, sir. Yes.
And basically, explain to the jury what your thoughts were in that book.
My thoughts are and were that the investigation of unnatural death in this country is really a national disgrace, that most jurisdictions, not Los Angeles, but in the United States, most jurisdictions, untrained people investigate homicides and accidents and suicides, both from an investigation at the scene point of view, which is often done by a funeral director, and from an autopsy, which is usually done by a hospital pathologist who is hospital on natural death, on heart disease, cancer, stroke, but who have no training in gunshot wounds and automobile accidents and suicides, which leads to lots of errors that occur around the country.
Did you also talk about, in that book, your background and what attracted you to the field of forensic medicine?
Yes, I did.
And what did you say in that regard?
I think, in general, I wrote about how initially, when I went to NYU Medical School and Bellevue Hospital, I trained to be a real doctor and treat people who were sick. And while at Bellevue Hospital, because of the coincidence that at Bellevue was where the medical examiner's office for New York was situated, when I used to come down and see deaths that had occurred at Bellevue from heart disease and cancer, I'd see off in the corners medical examiners investigating deaths of auto accidents and suicides and homicides. And Bellevue at NYU at that time, and still was a major institution in investigating natural diseases, which I was I had a number of professors who were Nobel laureates. And when I saw in the medical examiner's corner that there was very little interest in investigations by academic medicine into violent death, which involves about 7 or 8% of deaths, all deaths would be natural accident or suicide. And I just felt that by going into forensic pathology, I could contribute more to preventing suicides, drug addiction, alcohol, even homicides, than by being another person trying to cure cancer. So it was just the coincidence of my being at NYU, where the medical examiner's office was situated, that turned me on to forensic pathology, and where I've been for the past 40 years.
As a young doctor, did you find something exciting about the field of forensic pathology?
Oh, I think initially it was exciting to hear something on the radio about somebody dying, somebody being killed, and coming into the autopsy room and seeing the individual there, and seeing how the doctors were able to, within an hour or so, figure out a puzzle. There's a puzzle as to why somebody died, and with a proper investigation, with proper autopsy, with proper evaluation, and with experience, magic occurred. The human body gave forth secrets that permitted the answering of a lot of questions, mostly for the family, because the family is most concerned about the dead body, but also for insurance companies and hospitals and law enforcement. We saw that if a hospital made a mistake, we would notify the hospital and try to correct them so they wouldn't make the same mistake again. And it was all very exciting. The media attention initially was very exciting, that people paid attention to this in the daily news and other things. But the media rapidly wore off.
Are there such areas appointed by different governmental agencies that are known as commissions that are formed to investigate deaths?
Yes.
Would you explain to the jury what those commissions are, basically?
Yeah. At different levels of government, groups can be set up to try and assist in dealing with all kinds of problems. When these bodies get involved in deaths, where deaths occur, because lots of things happen without deaths, then often a medical examiner will be called in as part of the group, in this regard. I've been on
Well, let me
commissions, yeah.
ask you some questions in that regard. Let's start first with the state level. Are there commissions on the state level that you've been involved with?
Yes, yes.
Would you please tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about the state commissions and the highlights of those commissions?
Yes, I'm a member of the New York State Commission that investigates all deaths that occur in prisons and police custody in New York State. One of the reasons this commission is set up is because it's often very difficult for a locality, for a borough, for a county to investigate itself, so that the state, after the Attica deaths, Attica prison uprising in the early 1970s, where there were a lot of complaints about how prisoners were treated by guards, Governor Rockefeller set up a 5-member commission to examine all health care and all deaths that occur in custody. And I've been the forensic pathology member of that group since some 20 years now.
Do you get reappointed to that?
Yes, each guy, it's a 5-year term. So I've been appointed by Governor Rockefeller and reappointed by Governor Carey, by Governor Cuomo, and I'll be up shortly for a new governor. But it's appointed by the governor with the approval of the legislature. The legislature acts on it. It's a non-paid position, but it's has a lot of authority to examine health care. We have over 100,000 people in jails in New York State to make sure that it's done properly.
The governors in New York that you mentioned, are they members of both political parties, both Democrats and Republicans?
Yes, I've been appointed by both Democrat and Republican, and I'm non-political, I think.
Any other commissions?
Yeah, there's another similar commission that
On
was
the state level?
established about 10 years after this to look into, I'm sorry?
No, the judge is looking at me, and he wants me now to ask you to wait till I finish the question.
Sorry, I apologize.
Okay? Thank you, because it's really very difficult.
Yeah.
And I understand.
This chair does things to people.
Yeah, we've heard that before. Please continue.
There's a similar commission that was where the governor appoints people, physicians, lawyers, mental health workers, to examine all medical care and all deaths that occur in mental hospitals throughout New York State. And I'm a forensic pathologist member of that commission. So we look into how people are treated while alive and to make sure that the investigations into how they die is done properly, or we do our own investigation.
And just as there are state commissions, are there international commissions that have been formed by international groups?
Yes, there are more and more international requests for assistance in investigating deaths around the world that may be controversial in the place where the person dies.
And have you been appointed to any of those commissions?
Well, I've been requested by various groups to do autopsies, re-autopsies in other countries, yes.
And would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury just the highlights of some examples of work you've done on the international level?
Well, recently, about a year ago, I went with a group of American scientists to Croatia to identify persons who died in the current Serbo-Croatian conflicts by autopsy and DNA techniques. I've been over to, at the request of various human rights groups, to the Gaza Strip and to the West Bank in Israel to investigate prisoners who died, Palestinian prisoners who died in Israeli jails, and do autopsies there. I've been over about 3 years ago to, at the request of the U.S. State Department and the Russian government, to Russia to examine remains that had been found that were thought to have been the Romanov family, and Nicholas and Alexandra, Anastasia, people who were murdered in 1918 at the time of the Communist Revolution. And I've been to many countries to do teaching and training in how to do proper forensic investigation into violent deaths in Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, at various governmental requests.
Does the United States government form commissions to investigate deaths of a high-profile nature?
Yes, they may.
And have you been appointed to any such commissions?
Yes.
Would you point out to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the highlights of commissions that you have been appointed to by the United States government?
The highlight would be I was asked to be chairman of the forensic pathology panel of the United States Congressional Select Committee on Assassinations. This is the end of the 1970s. That was formed to investigate the deaths of President John F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King. And there were two panels, one to investigate the death of President John Kennedy and one to investigate the death of Dr. King, and I was the chairman of both for the pathologists'
And reports
investigation.
generated as a result of those committees? that you
Yes, the
chaired?
reports were generated. We had to give our findings in the public congressional committees.
And did you make findings regarding your opinion from a forensic pathologist point of view of the death of President John F. Kennedy?
Yes, I did.
And did you, as chairman of your committee, make recommendations to the United States government as to the cause and manner of death of the killing of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Yes, and it goes further, and some of the causes of death are pretty obvious. It goes into certain aspects of the death, how close was the weapon, the trajectory of the bullet wounds. What the least important thing that a medical examiner does is determine the cause of death in 95% of cases, because 95% of homicides, there's blood coming out of the skin, and the police are super at tracing the blood back to the hole in the body and determining if it's a gunshot wound or a stab wound or a baseball bat. For the medical examiner to confirm the obvious, that President Kennedy died of a gunshot wound, doesn't contribute much. The medical examiner is supposed to contribute other information to the cause of death, protect evidence, take the right sections, tissues, documentation, protect trace evidence. So the cause of death is usually the least important part of what we do.
And would you describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the purpose of the examination of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Yes. Dr. King died of a gunshot wound of the right cheek that then went into the chest and lung and caused damage to the spine. Also, a single rifle bullet wound, and that was pretty straightforward. But an issue had arisen that because there was, under the microscope, little black dots under the microscope in the skin of the entrance wound, that this was thought by some to be a close contact wound, because when a bullet comes out of a weapon, this is a rifle, powder comes out with the bullet, and the powder can go up to about 24 inches. And if we see powder on the skin, that means the weapon is pretty close. If we don't see powder, it means it's further away. And although James Earl Ray had been identified as the shooter from 100 yards away, his discharge, his shooting of the weapon should not have left any powder on the skin. So there was an issue of somebody being closer to Mr. King, Dr. King. And what we were able to do 10 years later is go down to Memphis, Tennessee, get the slides, get the material, look at the scene of death, that the site of death occurred, and actually take out the little pieces of black material that was in the skin and have it analyzed in the laboratory. And it turned out that these little black dots were not powder from a gun, but were little fragments of lead from the tip of the lead bullet that was fired. The bullet that was used to kill Dr. King was a rifle bullet with a soft-nosed lead meant for big game hunting, and little fragments of lead had broken off and gave the appearance of being gunshot powders from a close discharge. And our commission was able to show that that wasn't true, and that took away that aspect of Congress's concern that there was a mistake made in the investigation of Dr. King's death.
In that regard, you said that you did an examination 10 years later. Is that part of your training and part of the science that you can, with expertise, come in and evaluate things relating to death some significant periods of time later?
Yes, yes. A forensic pathologist is trained not only to do autopsies and to interpret autopsies, but also to examine and interpret what other persons do, to examine remains that may be, as with the Romanoff family, 70 years old, to review what other pathologists have done, as with Dr. King or with President Kennedy. We review the President Kennedy material, and we're able to do that 15 or 20 years later, 25 years later. Sorry. 16 years later, 63 to 78, sorry. That's the purpose. The purpose of a medical legal autopsy is not only to make findings, but also to document the findings so that others later on can come and review the material. I know when I do an autopsy on somebody who's been shot, for example, that they may have another pathologist coming for the other side to review the material because this may come to court. So it's very common for medical examiners to review each other's work, and we're obligated as part of the forensic autopsy to document everything by photographs, by microscopic slides, by x-rays, by toxicology, and by the dictated record, so that somebody else can come later on and independently make his or her own judgment. And that's what an autopsy is. It's a documentation of findings, so we can come back 20, 30, 50 years later and still arrive at opinions as to how things happened.
In the course of your career, could you estimate for the jury how many autopsies you have personally performed?
Over the years, I've performed, going back to 1955, I guess, when I started out in the medical examiner's office as a volunteer, over 20,000 autopsies.
And how many autopsies have you supervised, approximately?
Many times that number. When I was medical examiner in New York City, the office performed something like 7,000 or 8,000 autopsies a year, and there were about 8 physicians doing autopsies, and we would do 1,000 or more than 1,000 autopsies each a year.
You've told the jury of the major cases that you have reviewed. Can you approximate how many cases of autopsies you have reviewed that were performed by others?
Over the years, there'd be many hundreds, thousands of autopsies, just autopsies, not the remains.
Well, both. Autopsies and remains.
I've reviewed, when I was medical examiner, there'd be 8 autopsies going on at a time, and commonly review thousands of autopsies each year that other doctors did.
Are you frequently called upon as a consultant to review findings of others in the field of medical examination relating to death?
Yes.
And are you called by members of both the prosecution and the defense?
Yes.
And as a result of those investigations, is it more common to be called as a witness or more common not to be called as a witness?
It's more common, once I've given my opinions and reviewed, not to be called as a witness.
And what is the reason for that, in your opinion?
Objection, Your Honor. Call for speculative.
Do you always agree with the side that hired you to investigate a case?
No, not at all.
And in fact, is it is it more common that you do not agree with the side that called you to do the investigation?
Yeah, it's more common that I would disagree with some significant aspect of the theory of whichever side has asked me to review the case. So it's more common for me to disagree than to be in agreement.
How many times have you testified as an expert witness in your field? Approximately again.
Many hundreds of times, maybe 1,000. Counting grand juries, it would be well over 1,000 times, many hundreds of times.
Now, you have told us that the majority of your work has been work for governmental agencies. Does that mean that primarily you are called by prosecutors to render testimony?
Yeah, my work principally is working, as most medical examiners do, work for a governmental agency, either the city or the state. And in that regard, in all of my official work, I would be called by the prosecutor's office. But in my private capacity, not the same.
Regarding cases that you've been called to testify by prosecutors, could you give the jury some highlights of cases that you have participated in as a witness for the prosecution?
Yes, I was recently a witness for the prosecutor of Jackson, Mississippi, in the reinvestigation of the death of Medgar Evers, who had been a civil rights leader who had been killed in 1963, shortly before President Kennedy was shot, same year. And 29 years later, we were able to exhume the body, to learn information, and that led to trial last year. Went to trial and result 30 years later, last year, 31 years later.
Any other cases that would be highlight cases outside of the County of Los Angeles that you've testified for the prosecution?
Yes, I've been a witness for the prosecutor's office in Detroit, recently in Detroit, Michigan, in the case in which a young man, Malice Green, died while being subdued by police, and there was an issue of whether he died because of police action or because of cocaine drug use, and I was an expert for the prosecutor in that area. I've been an expert for the prosecutor in Lancaster County and a number of times in Pennsylvania. We just exhumed the body of a child that has been dead for some 10 or 15 years with a case of possible child abuse, and the body's just been exhumed, and further investigation is being done in that regard. So medical examiners commonly deal with bodies that have deaths that have occurred sometime before.
Regarding the County of Los Angeles, have you been contacted by prosecutors from the District Attorney's Office of the County of Los Angeles in the past?
Yes.
And would you share with the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, highlight cases that you have been contacted to investigate on behalf of the people of the County of Los Angeles by the District Attorney's Office?
Yes, I think the first contact was in the death of John Belushi in the early 1980s, where I was an expert for the District Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, testified in the grand jury, testified at the trial relative to the cause of Mr. Belushi's death, because there were drugs on board, and a criminal trial resulted, in which I testified for Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office.
Do you recall who the prosecutor was in that case?
Mr. Montagna.
Is he still with the District
He's
Attorney's
still there.
Office?
He's a wonderful district attorney.
You still
As
have-
I understand, yes, he's still with the district attorney's office.
Do you still have contact with him?
Yes, Michael Montagna. And then around the same time, I was involved in the investigation, re-autopsy of the death of a young athlete, a football player in Los Angeles County, Ron Settles, who died in a police precinct in Signal Hill. He had been a well-known football star at the university. And initially I was called by the attorney for the family, Mr. Cochran, Johnnie Cochran, this goes back to 1983, and later on was taken on also as an expert in the re-autopsy and exhumation by the district attorney in Los Angeles County, whose name was Mr.
Who is
Gil
that?
Garcetti.
He was not the district attorney at the time?
He was one of the assistant district attorneys. And the various physicians present who came, I was at that time on sabbatical, on a leave of absence from New York City, and I was working in Suffolk County, and I and Dr. Weinberg, the chief medical examiner, did the autopsy, and Dr. Tom Noguchi, who was at that time the chief medical examiner in Los Angeles, came representing the people of Los Angeles, and Dr. Werner Spitz, whose book has been brought forth by Mr. Kellberg, was the expert who was hired by the Signal Hill Police Department, or PBA. And so all of us, some 12 years ago, were in a little autopsy room for about 2 days and resolved the issue that, in my opinion, that Mr. Settles had not died of suicidal hanging, as was initially thought, but that he died at the hands of another.
And did Mr. Garcetti testify in a deposition as to the quality of your performance on behalf of the district attorney?
Mr. Garcetti was terrific.
Strike is non-responsive. It's distinct.
Did he testify? Did he offer testimony to your knowledge?
He testified at some subsequent hearing. Yes, he testified at a hearing, which was, I think, a
Everything other than yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And it's irrelevant. Distinct.
The yes answer stays, Your Honor?
Yes, answer.
That Mr. Garcetti did testify at a deposition. And to your knowledge, was he asked questions about your competence and capabilities?
No, the record's irrelevant.
More recently, have you been called upon by the Los Angeles District Attorney in the last 5 or 6 years to offer testimony and consultation regarding any high-profile homicide case?
Yes.
Would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the circumstances and the case involved?
This is about 6 years, it started about 6 years ago, where a Dr. Boggs, B-O-G-G-S, was involved with the death of a person in his office in Glendale. And because of the investigation of the detective Perkins of Glendale, a scheme arose whereby 3 persons were thought by the prosecutor, by the detectives, to have engaged in a complicated scheme to insure each other for $1.5 million, and then then have a dead body or kill somebody, misidentified, and collect the proceeds. And this happened with one body. And in the investigation by the police department, it turned out that the person had been misidentified, and I came down to review the autopsy findings. I was asked by the district attorney's office of Los Angeles to come to Los Angeles, to go to the medical examiner's office to review the cause of death, because the cause of death was listed as a heart attack of some type. And that didn't make sense with the history that was obtained. So when I reviewed it and went over the records, it was my opinion that this young man had been suffocated, died of homicidal suffocation. A trial was held back about 5-6 years ago. Dr. Boggs was convicted, and recently
Let's just follow up on that for a moment if we can. How did you come to get involved in the consultation and later testimony for the district attorney's office regarding the prosecution of Dr. Boggs?
my understanding is that when
Strike John is calling for hearsay, lack of foundation, or speculation.
I think the fact that he was contacted by the district attorney's office to offer as to this when the case speaks for itself.
Well, I appreciate that, Your Honor, but I think it becomes very significant if we could approach. Well, I'm trying to go as quickly as possible. His resume, as you know, is quite extensive.
Your Honor, I'll ask counsel. I'm trying to speed this up.
Thank you. And while you have been working as a consultant on the O.J. Simpson case, have you been called to testify by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office in this very building, on this very floor?
Yes.
Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury about that?
Yes. After Dr. Boggs was convicted, the two other associates were disappeared and were hard to find, and the district attorney's office and the police department did find them in the past year or two, one through the Oprah Winfrey program, and in Sardinia, where he'd gone with a lot of money from the initial insurance scam. And they were brought back here and brought to trial in this building on courtroom down the hall in the past 2 months or so, and they've been on trial, and the trial just ended last week. The trial ended, and a verdict just came back on that.
And in that case, was there also testimony by a coroner from Los Angeles?
Yes, there was a testimony from a coroner who'd done the autopsy again in Los Angeles, and I testified twice actually in that case, on direct and on rebuttal in that case.
And the jury rendered a conviction in that case?
Yes.
Who was the prosecutor in that case?
Mr. Albert McKenzie, also a terrific district attorney in Los Angeles District Attorney's Office.
Now, was that done as part of your outside practice, away from your paid position with the state of New York?
Yes.
And do you charge the same rates to prosecutors and to the district attorney's office as you do to private clients like myself who retain your services for consultation and evaluation?
In Los Angeles, I do, yes.
And what is that rate?
I charge $1,500 a day, whatever the time's involved.
And your airfare and other expenses are paid by the person who contacts you?
Yes, that is, I'll be paid $1,500 a day. I'll charge $1,500 a day, plus whatever the expenses are.
And that's the same whether or not you're called by the LA District Attorney or you're called by myself?
That's correct.
When did you initially get involved in the case regarding O.J. Simpson?
I was called by you around midnight on June 14th of last year. I received a call, a telephone call, while I was in New York City.
And did I request that you immediately come out for consultation?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
I'm trying to speed it up, Your Honor. And when did you arrive in Los Angeles?
I think I arrived on the 16th. May I just check my notes? On the June 16th, I arrived in Los Angeles.
Did you come
On
with
Thursday.
Did you come with any other expert witness?
Yes,
Who'd you come with?
Dr. Henry Lee.
And were your services offered to the Los Angeles Police Department to aid them in their investigation?
Objection, Your Honor, is irrelevant.
That is my understanding, yes.
I'll
That,
move to strike
Oh.
as calling for speculation, hearsay, lack of foundation.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness, please? A copy of a letter that was sent to Detective Van Adder.
No, I asked to approach on this with the court reporter. I'd ask for a copy.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Dr. Baden, were you willing to cooperate with the Los Angeles County Coroner in their investigation?
Yes.
And did you make a request to review the bodies of the decedents Ronald Goldman and Nicole Simpson?
Yes.
And what happened as a result of that request? Were you allowed to do so?
No, because when I arrived on the 16th, the bodies had been released to the families.
Were there limitations placed on what you could and could not do in what you felt was necessary for a complete and thorough examination?
Objection, Your Honor, is vague.
Well, I was able to see photographs of the remains. I was not able to discuss the findings with the medical examiners involved in the autopsy. I was and not able to see the remains.
Was your request to see the remains done prior to the time that Nicole Simpson was buried and laid to rest?
Yes.
Was that the same thing for Ronald Goldman?
Yes.
Now, regarding your participation as a consultant in this case, were you asked to do a complete and thorough, comprehensive examination?
Yes.
And have you done that?
I've done it to the best of my abilities and the best of what was available to me to review.
Have you spent a lot of time on this case?
Yes.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury approximately how many days you have spent on this case in California alone?
I've been in California since June 14th, more than 70 days in California.
How many trips have you made out here at our request?
About 18, 20 trips from New York City to Los Angeles in the course of that time.
Were you present during the preliminary hearing of this case?
Yes. Yes, I did, and I worked with you at that time.
And were you also present during the 8-day direct examination of Dr. Lakshmanan?
Yes, I was in this courtroom.
And were you able to, did you follow and listen to all of his testimony in this case?
Yes, I did.
In addition to those times, what other times have you spent generally in preparing for your evaluation and opinions in this case?
Well, I spent time with Dr. Lee on arriving in Los Angeles. Immediately the next morning, examined Mr. Simpson for any forensic evidence, any injuries, any medical or scientific findings that might aid in the evaluation of what happened and how it happened. I did spend time in the coroner's office with Dr. Lakshmanan reviewing records and photographs. I did spend time in the Los Angeles Police Department laboratory with Dr. Kessler and others reviewing evidence. I did make a few trips and examinations of the crime scene at the Bundy location and at evaluation examination at Mr. Simpson's home in Rockingham. I did review evidence that was sent to Albany Medical Center for review in February of this year. Much of the evidence was made available to the forensic scientist for the defense for review. I did visit the crime laboratory in March of '95 in Los Angeles to review additional materials. And in addition to that, I participated in many conferences in Los Angeles with you and Mr. Cochran and Associates in reviewing and going over and trying to interpret the medical and the scientific evidence that I would have knowledge of, and interpret it in the light of questions that lawyers have and other information that was being gathered and developed by Dr. Lee and others. And I spent hundreds of hours on telephone with you from New York City over the time, reviewing evidences and materials.
Have we reviewed books together?
We spent a lot of time reviewing books, authorities, reviewing the testimony of Dr. Lakshmanan, and other testimonies that forensic pathologists would have input into or have some knowledge of.
Have you reviewed every note, memorandum, and report done by the LA County Coroner's Office regarding the deaths of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Simpson?
Yes.
Have
yes.
you reviewed every photograph taken by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Simpson?
Yes.
Have you reviewed every photograph taken by the Los Angeles Police Department of the crime scene at Bundy and of O.J. Simpson's residence?
Yes.
Have you reviewed police reports that have been filed?
Yes.
Have you reviewed investigative reports from personnel of the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office?
Yes.
And do you feel that you are qualified to make an opinion as to the findings of the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office as to whether or not you agree or disagree with those?
Yes, I feel that I can have opinions and am sufficiently informed to be able to make opinions relative to findings of the Los Angeles Coroner's Office.
And do you feel that you've had enough information, enough time, and enough data to make your opinion available to this jury regarding evidence that you have qualifications as a forensic pathologist to do?
Yes.
Were you strike that. Did you, in your initial observations at the coroner's office, find any errors or omissions that were significant and important regarding Nicole Simpson and any injuries she might have suffered that were not listed in the autopsy report? Well, can he answer that yes or no, and then we'll get that?
Yes.
When were you able to do this? Where were you able to do this? What was the date, time, and circumstances surrounding it?
On June 22nd, 1994, I was authorized to visit with Dr. Barbara Wolf, Dr. Lakshmanan in the coroner's office, and he graciously made all of the information that he had available for us to review, which included not only the photographs, but also the tissue samples that had been retained from the autopsy, which is normally done when autopsy is done. Some tissue is retained from the different organs for possible further study under the microscope, and these are kept in a formaldehyde type solution. We were able to review those tissues that were saved in formaldehyde. We were able to review all of the fluids and tissues that were saved for possible toxicological examination, and for examination for drugs.
Let me interrupt you for a second here and get right to the point. Did you find any evidence regarding any injury to the head area of Nicole Brown Simpson that was not previously recorded or found by the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office?
Yes.
Excuse me, I'll move to strike, calling for speculation and compound as to the term found versus recorded.
changing the word found to recorded, were you able to discover any omissions that were not recorded by the coroner's office regarding the Cole Brown Simpson?
Yes.
What were you able to find? What did you find and discover?
Yeah, in reviewing the tissues that have been saved, the small blocks of tissue, Dr. Wolf and I found a bruise to the brain, damage to the brain from some blunt force that had not been recorded.
Was that an important and significant finding, in your opinion?
Yes, I think so.
Why?
Because it indicated that Ms. Simpson had suffered a blow to the head that caused brain damage, and that's significant to a forensic pathologist.
Did you find anything in the area of the neck area relating to the thyroid that had been overlooked?
Yes.
What did you find?
John, I'm going to move to strike overlooked again, calling for speculation. If the term is recorded, I have no objection.
Substitute the word overlooked for recorded.
Yes. In the course of the autopsy, Dr. Golden had preserved a portion of the Adam's apple and windpipe, and which is the area that's included with the Adam's apple area. And on examining that organ that was retained in the formaldehyde, we again found a cut through one of the horns, one of the areas of the Adam's apple that had not been recorded.
Did you examine any clothing of the decedents?
Yes.
What were your findings in that regard?
Dr. Lakshmanan also made available to us the clothing for examination of both Ms. Simpson and Mr. Goldman that were still in the possession of the coroner's office, and we found that there was some mold on Mr. Goldman's shirt, which indicated a growth of mold during that 10-day period. Otherwise, we found evidences of stab wounds and trace evidences of blood and material that was present on the clothing that we left for the criminalists to review further.
Had the mold been recorded before?
No, the mold was not present at the time of the deaths in June 13th, and had grown there during the 10-day period of time, having to do with the conditions under which the shirts were stored. We try to preserve, medical examiners try to preserve clothing so that mold does not grow, and if there's moisture and if the clothing isn't preserved properly, mold can grow and interfere with the proper evaluation of the clothing.
You mentioned that in addition to visiting the coroner's office in Los Angeles, you also visited the Los Angeles Police Department evidence collection room?
Yes.
Did you visit that room on June the 24th of 1994?
Yes, we did.
Would you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you were allowed and not allowed to do during that examination?
Yes, we were authorized. You had obtained authorization for Dr. Wolf and I to review the evidence that had been collected up to that point by the Los Angeles Police Department, and we were allowed to look at the evidence but not to touch or photograph it, and in the presence of I think Ms. Kessler, Detective Van Adder, and others.
Did Ms. Kessler provide to you items of evidence for your examination and review that were a pair of dark-colored men's socks?
Included in the material were socks, yes.
Were you able to look at those socks?
We're able to look at the socks, but not able to touch or move these socks.
Were the socks put on some type of surface for your observation?
in my recollection, it was put on some paper to keep it clean and all, for examination, yes.
Type of white butcher paper?
Something like, yes,
Butcher-type
butcher paper, yes.
And did you observe the socks?
Yes,
Did you observe any blood on the socks?
no,
Did you see a frame of glasses?
yes, I saw the eyeglasses that were in an envelope.
Did you see any lenses that were associated with those eyeglasses?
Yes.
How many lenses did you see?
The frames were intact, but the lenses were loose. They had come out of the frame, so I saw two intact lenses together with the intact frames, but they were, the lenses were separate in the same envelope.
Did you examine and observe the frame of the glasses?
Yes.
Did you see any blood on the frame?
There was what appeared maroon material that suggested that it was blood that was dried on one of the frames.
For the purposes of your testimony today in reviewing the crime scene, in reviewing the findings of the medical examiner, and offering your opinions to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you feel that you need to have the photographs of the autopsy to give your conclusions?
No, I can.
All right, let's take our morning recess at this time. Remember all my admonitions to you, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be recessed at 15.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, let the record reflect that we've now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel, that Dr. Michael Baden is on the witness stand undergoing direct examination by Mr. Shapiro. And Mr. Shapiro, you may continue.
Thank you very much. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Baden, in your experience as a medical examiner in testimony before juries, what is the standard that a professional medical examiner should use in rendering scientific medical opinions?
The standard, in my opinion, should be, and usually is, to a reasonable degree, opinion held to a reasonable degree of medical or scientific certainty.
Are possibilities the type of evidence and testimony a professional medical examiner should give in a homicide case?
Not in my opinion.
You've seen 8 days of direct examination, which involved many, many hypothetical situations that are based on possibilities. In your opinion, is this a correct way for a professional medical examiner to offer testimony?
Sustain.
You've seen lots of demonstrations that were done in this case between Mr. Kelberg and Dr. Lakshmanan.
Yes.
And you heard questions asked, and in your opinion, doctor, is it possible? Did you not?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, that misstates the way the questions were asked.
Sustain.
Could it have happened this way? Did you hear those questions?
Also a mistake.
Sustain.
Did you understand that the testimony that was given by Dr. Lakshmanan was not testimony related to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
Objection irrelevant as to his
Sustain.
What is your opinion of professionals who give medical opinions that are not to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
objection asked and answered.
Overruled.
Physicians learn in medical school early on that anything is possible in medicine. So any question that goes to a physician, is it possible that, almost has to be answered yes, and doesn't and gives the cloak of expertise on an answer that may only list possibilities that are remote. Unfortunately, the expert, like Dr. Lakshmanan, like myself, usually are confined to answer the questions that lawyers give us. So Dr. Lakshmanan did answer questions that I felt were possibilities, but in my opinion, it doesn't help the finders of fact, because anything is possible.
So would it be your opinion that possibilities have no significance when coming to medical conclusions regarding expert testimony?
In my opinion, it would have very little significance if it answers only to a possibility. If our expertise permits us to give an answer to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, which is upwards of like 95%, I think that could be helpful to the persons who are trying the facts. But a possibility might be 1% possibility, which I think can be misleading many times.
And did you find that many of the hypotheticals that were done here were misleading from a scientific medical point of view?
Sustained. Sustained.
I want to direct your attention towards the role of a medical examiner in crime scene investigation. Are you familiar with that aspect of medical examinations from a forensic point of view?
Yes.
Would you say that a medical examiner or coroner is merely a body removal service at the scene of a crime?
Often medical examiners are used in that fashion, but I think that a medical examiner is absolutely not a body removal service, but an expert who contributes a lot to the investigation at the crime scene.
In your opinion, then, the role of a medical examiner extends beyond the bounds of the autopsy room?
Absolutely.
What, in your opinion, should a medical examiner do at a crime scene investigation, such as the crime scene we have in this case involving the murders of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson? Should they go to the scene?
Yeah, in my opinion, the best information and the greatest information can be obtained from going promptly to the scene of death, from examining the scene and the environment, not just the body. The last thing a medical examiner does is to examine the body, because the body can be viewed under better light in the autopsy room. But the circumstances, the trace evidence, the building that the body is found in are all important parts of the scene.
What should the medical examiner be looking for and why at the scene of the crime?
The medical examiner should be looking for anything that might be helpful in determining how to proceed with the case, what to do, whether an autopsy should be done, to collect any evidence that might be present, to learn anything about the decedent that might be helpful in helping perform an informed autopsy. Not all autopsies are the same. Some autopsies require different types of examination of the body than others, to determine if there's any medications, any alcohol, any drugs at the scene, which can't be done once the body is removed to the autopsy room, which may help in determining, again, what should be looked for at the autopsy, what toxicology should be done. To look for things that are unexpected. We don't know when we go to a scene of death what we're looking at. As Watson asked Holmes, "What are you looking for?" And Holmes said, "I don't know, but I'll tell you."
What did Watson ask Holmes? I was just interested. Doctor, would there be a reason at the residence of Nicole Brown Simpson for a medical examiner to go in the home where the bodies were found adjacent to?
Oh, absolutely. The scene of death is one area, but the home would be very important to see if there's any evidence of when the person was last in the residence, to see what the person last ate, to see what's in the garbage can, to see what's on the stove, to see what's in the refrigerator. That kind of material to then correlate with autopsy findings, to see, in this instance, how long the candles had been burning, for example, which one of the important areas that a medical examiner can contribute to is not so much the cause of death, but is the time of death, which is one of the responsibilities the medical examiner has, to look for any evidence that will assist in further, in how the autopsy should be done and what drugs to look for, whether the person's been sick, if any notes around, anything that can help in determining how the person died and how the person may have left trace evidence behind, what the bed looked like, whether there's any spots or stains on the bed, whether there was a struggle inside the house, whether there are blood stains around in the house or not. These are all part of what the medical examiner has to look for, again, to be able to do an intelligent autopsy.
All right. In this particular case, what would be the importance, in your opinion, of going into the refrigerator of Nicole Brown Simpson?
Well, in the refrigerator, in this particular case, it would be important to know what food was in the refrigerator so that when the autopsy is done, it can be correlated with whatever was present in the stomach, because we know out front, as a medical examiner, that the last meal has some significance. Was the last meal eaten at home? Was it eaten elsewhere? And we can tell that by correlating what's present at autopsy in the stomach contents with whatever is purported to have been the last meal or whatever may be present in the refrigerator or in the garbage or in the sink in the kitchen.
What about the clothing on the bodies of the victims at the scene? Is that something that comes within the purview of a medical examination from a forensic standpoint?
Yes, anything on the body is usually the province of the medical examiner, as opposed to the criminalist who's gathering information away from the body. And the clothing on the body, whether there's any kinds of foreign stains on the clothing, whether any foreign materials, we have to be able to identify, preserve, collect any evidences that might be present at the scene that might be lost in transport. Because once that body is moved from the scene, it has to go in some kind of a body bag container where valuable evidences can be lost sometimes, if not collected at the scene. And this instance, that was certainly proved to be true.
Can that be evidence that could point to someone's innocence as well as someone's guilt?
Yes.
And what kind of evidence was lost in this case by the way the coroner transported the body, in your opinion? Was there any evidence that could have been preserved properly that was not at the crime scene?
Yes.
What was that?
Well, there were blood drops on the back of Miss Simpson that should have been examined to determine who the blood came from. Maybe it came from the perpetrator. There was material on the hands. Often in struggles, the victim has evidence, trace evidences of hairs and fibers and blood on the hands that can be lost if the hands are not properly covered during transportation by rubbing against the rest of the body, and the hands may collect other kinds of evidence by being left unprotected in the wrappings of the entire body. I think those two areas, evidence could have been better protected and preserved, and that would have helped resolve in the investigation.
Is there a team approach to this effort, since you have the police out there, you have detectives, investigators, possibly paramedics, the medical examiner, does this work as a team effort?
Yes.
And how is that coordinated, and what is the different responsibilities? What is the responsibility of the coroner as part of this team?
Guys are relevant.
Yeah, the coroner is there to examine the body, to protect the body, to protect any evidence on the body, and to determine how the body should be moved. The the medical examiner has to work with the police officers who are present so as not to intrude on the police officer's investigation or the criminalist's investigation. And this is commonly done cooperatively between, among the medical examiner, among the criminalist. The medical examiner has to be aware of any resuscitative attempts. Certainly, if there's any thought that a person is alive, the emergency medical services respond. The medical examiner has to be able to distinguish what was done by the first responders, whoever found the body, what was present before the first responders, what the first responders might have contributed to the scene. There are many aspects of the scene investigation that a medical examiner can contribute to when working together with usually the criminalist, and not distorting any evidence.
Would you agree that then the medical examiner's job is at the scene to determine more what happened rather than who did it?
Yes, the medical examiner's role in general is we're concerned with what happened and to document what happened, not who done it.
And is the medical examiner's job to try to come to an immediate conclusion and then justify it, or just the opposite?
Oh, no. The medical examiner's job is to collect whatever information is there, to document whatever information is present, to protect whatever information is present, so that it can then be interpreted as the different tests are done and different results come through, not to jump to conclusions.
So the medical examiner is not there as an arm of the police or an arm of the district attorney, is he? Or she?
In my opinion, the medical examiner should be independent of the district attorney, independent of the prosecutor, independently arrive at whatever findings he or she may have, but work cooperatively with the prosecutor and the police. And it's often difficult to do that in the community, but the medical examiner should be independent of the other, the medical examiner is not an advocate.
In a homicide investigation such as the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, in your opinion, should the medical examiner perform an analysis for sexual activity of recent nature?
Yes, absolutely.
Why?
I think any young woman who's murdered, and even older women, the sexual analysis, sexual evidence collection kit should be performed, because there may be evidence present that can only be determined in the laboratory. We can't look at an adult woman. A child, we can look at a child and tell if there's sexual assault or not, but not an adult woman, especially a woman who's had children. And this depends on the results of the so-called rape kit. Isn't just semen analysis, it's hairs and fibers and blood and saliva, a lot of evidence collection that can be useful in documenting findings and in contributing to trace evidence, and we can't tell as medical examiners whether there's been forced sexual contact, whether there's been consensual sexual contact. Even that is important to the medical examiner to determine who might last have had contact with the woman in a murder investigation. That individual may be important.
And in your experience, has in fact these things that you've just told the jury been important in cases that you've been involved in?
Yes, we've done rape kits on even 80-year-old women who've been murdered who surprisingly had semen in the vagina that was not recognized at the scene that led to identifying who murderers were. So I think that it's an important tool of the medical examiner to do a rape kit analysis, especially in young women.
You've told the ladies and gentlemen of the jury that it's important, in your opinion, for a medical examiner to make a determination of when and how much the victims in this case last ate. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons to look in the refrigerator.
Yes.
Now, in this case, the testimony has been that Ronald Goldman's stomach contents were saved and Nicole Brown Simpson's stomach contents were discarded. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Now, with the stomach contents that were saved of Ronald Goldman, what can somebody who has your qualifications determine from examining stomach contents?
Yes. My qualification, any forensic pathologist can examine the stomach contents carefully under magnification and find what was eaten at the last meal. And that can be important sometimes. We don't know when we do the examination what's going to be important and what isn't going to be important later on. That's why we have to collect everything. And we can determine what was eaten at the last meal, and we can get a good idea of when it was eaten. So the part of the investigation into time of death goes not only by how the body changes after death, rigor mortis, lividity, temperature that's been raised here, but also to correlate it with the last meal. If we know what the last meal was and when it was, what the last meal was, we can then get an idea of how long after the meal the person died.
How do you determine what somebody ate after it's in their system?
After, I'm sorry?
After it's in their stomach? How
because,
can you
you
tell
know,
what they ate?
The food digests in a certain pattern. I mean, we eat food, and there's a God digests food in a certain way, and we can identify starches and meats, but most particularly vegetables. Vegetables keep their integrity because of the cellulose content, and lettuce and tomatoes easily identified during digestion. Mummies, 2,000 years old, have been identified with tomato seeds in the stomach. Seeds and other vegetables stay intact once the person dies. So we have a good time clock as to what's in the stomach, how long it takes to get that way, what the last meal was, sometimes how long after the last meal the person died.
So you're saying that you can actually separate and segregate different items of food in a stomach and look at them and see that they would be lettuce or tomato or celery, things like that? Can you do that?
Yes, absolutely.
Can all pathologists do that? Is that part of your training?
Not all pathologists. You see, 99% of pathologists are hospital-based pathologists who specialize in natural diseases like heart disease and cancer. But the less than 1% who are forensic pathologists who go on to study unnatural death more are trained to do that, yes.
In this case, were you afforded an opportunity to examine the stomach contents of Ronald Goldman?
Yes, yes.
And where did you do this examination?
In Albany Medical Center in March of, in February of this year, when the evidence was sent up from the Los Angeles crime lab. Dr. Lakshmanan, at our request, was kind enough to include the stomach contents, and Dr. Wolf and I were able to, and Dr. Lee, were able to examine the stomach contents at Albany Medical Center.
And that's in New York?
That's in upstate New York, Albany.
And what were you able to determine Mr. Goldman had in his stomach?
Mr. Goldman had a lot of digested food in his stomach, had about 200 cc, which is about 6, 7 ounces of food that was being digested in the stomach. And within that, there were identifiable fragments of a kale, K-A-L-E, kale-like compound, thick lettuce type vegetable. There was tomato, there was celery, there was raisins that were clearly identifiable.
So if you knew from eyewitnesses what Mr. Goldman had as his last meal, and you found, for example, he had a salad, but there was no raisins in it, what would that tell you as a forensic medical examiner?
That would indicate that after he had eaten that meal, and after he went home, he ate, or at some other place, he ate something that had raisins in it. And so he must have eaten something containing raisins after he had that meal you referred to.
So if there was a proper and thorough investigation, it's your expert opinion that someone could determine with a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not Mr. Goldman ate something after Mezzaluna?
Yes, sorry. Yes, if one had the proper, reliable information.
And what information would that be?
As to when he ate and what he ate at Mezzaluna, and it would be helpful to know about the time he ate also.
So I take it now, obviously, since you could not do any examination of Nicole Simpson's stomach contents since they were thrown away, we are forever deprived of that evidence.
Yeah.
What is the effect of the stomach contents of Nicole Simpson being discarded?
Well, Dr. Golden did describe stomach contents in the autopsy report, and he does include mention of some foodstuffs, including rigatoni that he saw. But it didn't permit another independent examination.
In that regard, did you find things in examining the stomach contents of Ronald Goldman that were not included in the autopsy findings?
Yes.
What did you find that were not included?
Much of, I think that, as I recall, without going to the autopsy report, the lettuce-like material was described in Ron Goldman's stomach contents, but not the tomato and raisin and celery, green pepper, I think also present, that we found and documented.
Now, in the findings of Dr. Golden in the autopsy protocol regarding Nicole Brown Simpson, there was an indication that her stomach had recognizable rigatoni.
Yes.
Rigatoni is a type of pasta.
Yes.
How quickly does pasta get digested in the stomach to a point where it could not be recognizable as rigatoni?
Rigatoni and pastas and starches lose their integrity very quickly in the stomach and the stomach acids. They don't maintain their identifiable characteristics as vegetables do, so that rigatoni and that type of pasta would lose its distinct shape very quickly, half hour, depending on what else is in the stomach.
So if there was testimony that Nicole Brown Simpson had rigatoni at Mezzaluna Restaurant between 8 o'clock and 8:30 p.m. on the night of her death, and talked to her mother at about 9:45, 9:47 that night, and it was discovered that there was rigatoni that was recognizable in her system after her death, would that have any significance to you?
Yes.
What significance would it have?
That would suggest that she ate something containing rigatoni after the meal at Mezzaluna, and perhaps after she got home.
So that would be one reason why you'd want to check the refrigerator, the garbage disposal, and the wastebasket.
Yes, yes.
I want to direct your attention now to the areas that a medical examiner focuses on in a homicide investigation. Would you agree that one of the things that the medical examiner must determine is the cause of death?
Yes.
And in this case, were you able to determine the cause of death?
Yes.
In your opinion, would any competent medical examiner be able to determine the cause of death?
Any competent medical examiner, any competent police officer could rapidly determine the cause of death, as was done here.
How long would that take?
10 seconds.
And what was the cause of death?
Cause of death was hemorrhage from cut wounds and stab wounds in both individuals. Actually, in both, from cuts to the neck area.
And is part of the job of a medical examiner to determine the manner of death?
Yes.
And is that something you were able to determine?
Yes.
And is that something every competent medical examiner should be able to do?
Yeah. By manner of death, we mean natural accident, suicide, homicide, and a competent medical examiner, competent police officer, as here, immediately determined that this was a homicide. That was the manner of death, and they were correct.
And that was something that could be done very, very quickly.
Yes.
So now we've spent 8 days on direct examination in this courtroom. In this case, a lot of effort has gone in. What remains for the medical examiner to opine?
Well, in this instance, the cause of death, the manner of death, were very apparent right at the crime scene. And when the police called the case in, the deaths in, they said homicides by stabbings and cuttings. The medical examiner has more of a role in determining how the injuries occurred, the nature of the injuries, what kind of weapons were involved, how long the person may have lived after the injuries were inflicted. Those are all things that a medical examiner can determine. The medical examiner also at the scene can help in determining how long the person's been dead, which is the most common question that's asked of a medical examiner at a scene by the police. Doc, how long has the person been dead? Because that's going to be helpful in the investigation as to who should be questioned by the police. And the medical examiner has a great and increasing responsibility. All this DNA technology and that didn't exist 10 years ago. The medical examiner has a responsibility to protect the evidence so that other scientists can look at it, to make sure that the blood and the semen, if present, or hairs and fibers, don't get lost or distorted in the removal of the body, which is a delicate process, from the crime scene to the medical examiner's office, the coroner's office, and that everything is identified, all traces are identified, protected, collected, so that others can, DNA people, criminalists, toxicologists, lab directors can do their work properly.
In your personal experience of coming to conclusions in other high-profile murder cases as to the number of killers involved, you have been called upon to reach conclusions, is that correct?
Yes.
And in this case, can you tell within a reasonable degree of medical certainty how many killers were involved in this case?
No.
In your opinion, can anybody tell how many killers were involved in this case?
The medical examiner can't. The medical examiner, from the nature of the injuries, of the wounds, and the crime scene, cannot tell how many assailants there were.
In your opinion, can the medical examiner in this case tell whether or not the killings resulted from a single or double-edged knife?
the medical examiner can say that a single-edged knife was involved, but the medical examiner cannot say how many knives were involved and whether or not a number of the wounds were caused by double-edged blades too. So the medical examiner cannot tell how many weapons and whether they were single and double-edged.
Is there a proper procedure that is acceptable throughout the United States to make a determination regarding whether a single or double-edged weapon was used in a stabbing case based on photographs?
Photographs can be helpful, but it's the responsibility of the person doing the autopsy.
Objection, Your Honor, move to strike as non-responsive.
Yeah, the best evaluation is at the time of the autopsy, by looking at the wound, by approximating the wound, and by documenting that. That can then be photographed so others can see it, and that can help very much in determining whether the wound is single-edged or double-edged.
How does a medical examiner, under the standard practice in the United States, approximate a wound?
By initially taking the fingers and reapproximating the skin surfaces, because after a stabbing, depending on how the body tissues and elastic tissues and the skin is situated at that point, the stab wound may expand and widen or stay just the way it is, depending on unpredictable things under the skin and in the skin. The medical examiner can get a good shape of what the weapon was by taking the skin edges and putting them together as they were before the wound stretched out, making those observations, and then taking a piece of Scotch tape and putting it over the transparent Scotch tape over the wound, holding the edges together, photographing it so that with a ruler, so that this becomes a documentation of the shape of the weapon at that point in the skin, and then this correlated with how deep the stab wound is can lead to the medical examiner providing the investigators with information as to what kind of weapon they should be looking for.
So the standard practice would be to take some Scotch tape and just put it over the wound?
Yes, Scotch tape is very handy because, especially the non-reflective Scotch tape, because it provides a hold on the skin so that the edges are reapproximated. One can see if there's an edge is sharp or blunt. One gets a sense of the size of the wound. Sometimes one can even see serrations in a serrated knife. And then with proper photography, with a photograph, document that shape, and this can then be matched later on with weapons that are obtained, and the medical examiner can identify whether this is consistent or inconsistent with the wound on the body.
Is this procedure described and photographed in medical text
Yes.
and forensic text?
Yes.
Now, a picture was shown from a medical text while you were here to Dr. Lakshmanan. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And do you recall his opinion was that was taken only for the purpose of taking a picture to show in the book?
Yes.
Do you agree with that, or is that the standard procedure?
No, that should be standard procedure. That is, what Dr. Spitz in that book was trying to show is how it should be done.
Can you, as an expert medical examiner to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, tell the height of the assailant or assailants in this case?
No.
Can you, as an expert medical examiner within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, tell the weight of the perpetrator or perpetrators?
No.
Can you, as an expert medical examiner within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, tell the physique of the perpetrator or perpetrators?
No.
Would you say you would have as much chance as determining whether or not somebody had a mustache from observing ashes in a cremation as you could of coming up with what the size, weight, and height was of the perpetrators in this case?
Yes.
Regarding the timing of injuries, can this be based on the appearance of injuries in a photograph?
Very dangerous
Why?
to do it that way, because part of the timing of injuries, how long an injury's been present, is based on color changes, and that's very dependent on the color film, the speed, the flash, and how it's developed. The naked eye direct visualization is very helpful, and looking at the tissue under the microscope is the best means of determining how long an injury has been present in general.
And so that I understand you correctly, and the jury does, that when we're talking about timing of injuries, we're talking about whether it occurred before death, at the time of death, or after death?
Okay, that I was going how long before death an injury occurs, and also the same applies for distinguishing whether, or trying to distinguish whether an injury occurred after death or before death. But that also is very difficult and often impossible.
And why is that from photographs? Why is that difficult to tell from photographs?
It's difficult to tell in general, not only from photographs, because we can look at it, when we look at a black eye changing, or when we look at something under the microscope, it's because the body starts breaking down the red blood cells. If I bruise myself, I get a hemorrhage, I break little blood vessels, I get a hemorrhage under the skin. That's a black and blue mark. The body then does all kinds of things to get rid of the